Have you ever had the feeling that reality isn't as solid as everyone insists it is? That beneath what you see, touch, and are told to believe, something else is happening, something subtle, responsive, almost alive? Maybe you've felt it in quiet moments, when your thoughts seem to shape your experience more than circumstances ever did. Or when the moment you stopped forcing, everything strangely shifted, as if life responded the instant you released control. If you've ever sensed that observation itself matters, that awareness isn't just watching life, but somehow participating in it, pause right here, because what I'm about to share is something only a tiny fraction of people ever truly grasp. Most people go their entire lives believing reality is fixed, external, and completely independent of them, taught that consciousness is just a byproduct of the brain, and so they live as passengers, reacting, coping, repeating the same patterns, never questioning the rules they inherited. But physics discovered something that quietly shattered that worldview, a law so disturbing that even scientists resisted its implication. A law suggesting that reality does not fully exist until it is observed, that certainty comes after attention, not before it. This isn't spirituality dressed up as science. This is quantum mechanics, the most accurate theory humanity has ever developed, pointing directly at something we were never prepared to face. At the heart of this mystery is the observer effect, revealing that observation is not passive. The act of looking changes what is being looked at. Before observation, there is only probability, many possible outcomes existing at once. Observation collapses them into one experienced reality. And once you truly understand this, you can never see yourself or your life the same way again. That feeling of standing slightly outside life, watching rather than blindly participating, wasn't dysfunction. It may have been perception. Only about 1% of people ever slow down enough to question their assumptions, and fewer still follow the implications all the way down. In this series, we'll explore the quantum law hiding in plain sight behind physics, psychology, and consciousness itself. This is Observer Effect, Part 1. And if you stay with me, you're about to understand something that changes everything. Observation is more important than what you were taught. And the feeling you've had your whole life of watching existence from the outside was never a flaw. It was a signal, a sign that intuitively you understood something long before you had language for it. You sensed that awareness itself matters more than the stories handed to you about how the world works. Most people never question the worldview they inherit. They absorb it unconsciously from parents, schools, culture, and authority. They are taught to believe reality is fixed, solid, external, and completely independent of consciousness. In that model, life happens to you. Your role is to react, adapt, and survive inside rules you never chose. This quietly trains people to become passive observers of their own lives, outsourcing meaning to systems they never verified. But observation is not passive. True observation is an act of engagement. It is the moment awareness turns back on itself and asks, is this actually true? When you observe instead of automatically believing, the world begins to loosen. You notice thoughts are not facts. Emotions move. Identity is not as solid as it once seemed. That sense of standing slightly apart from life may have been your consciousness refusing to collapse into an inherited story. While others became their roles, you noticed the stage. You sensed fluidity beneath what looked fixed. Teaching gives you concepts. Observation gives you direct contact. When beliefs go unexamined, they become invisible. And invisible beliefs shape everything. Observation breaks the spell. You move from being a character in the script to someone who can read it. This is not rejecting science. It is refusing to confuse models with truth. Observation restores agency. Life shifts from happening to you to happening with you. Your sensitivity was never weakness. It was early awareness. What you were taught gave you a map. Observation shows you the territory. And once you trust observation, reality stops being a prison and becomes a dialogue. one you were always meant to take part in. Newton's viewpoint shaped the modern world more than most people realize, not because it was wrong, but because it was incomplete. In the Newtonian framework, reality appears solid, fixed, and mechanical, existing independently of the observer. The universe is imagined as a giant machine composed of separate parts moving through absolute space and time. In this worldview, consciousness is not fundamental. It is treated as a secondary byproduct of biological machinery. You exist inside the universe, but you do not meaningfully participate in its structure. The world moves, events unfold, causes lead to effects. Your role is to adapt, measure, and survive. This worldview was incredibly useful, but it trained generations to experience themselves as passive inhabitants of a fixed reality. Then came Einstein, and with him, a rupture in how reality could be understood. The theory of relativity didn't just refine Newton's equations. It redefined matter, energy, space, and time. With E equals mc squared, Einstein showed that matter and energy are interchangeable expressions of one reality. A rock, a planet, even your body, what appears solid, are actually condensed energy. Matter is no longer inert and fixed. The universe becomes dynamic, relational, and interconnected. Space and time themselves are no longer absolute. They bend and stretch in response to energy and motion. The universe stops being a machine and begins behaving like a living process. At the subatomic level, the solid world completely dissolved. Objects are not things, but patterns of probability, movement, and interaction. Atoms are mostly empty space, held together by invisible forces rather than solidity. Everything you see is energy, arranged into temporary, stable patterns. This becomes especially profound when applied to the human body. Within you, chemical, mechanical, electrical, and thermal energies are constantly in motion. Even your heart is an electrical oscillator, beating through rhythmic energy exchange. You are not a static object moving through time. You are a dynamic field reorganizing itself moment by moment. Seen this way, consciousness can no longer be dismissed as an extra. Reality becomes fluid, contextual, and deeply interconnected. The shift from Newton to Einstein is not just scientific, it is psychological. It invites us to stop seeing ourselves as passive objects and recognize participation in a living universe. An object can exist in many different states and positions at the same time, one of the most unsettling truths revealed by quantum mechanics. This discovery directly challenges how we were taught to think about reality. At the heart of this idea is wave-particle duality. Electrons do not behave as solid, self-contained particles in the classical sense. They appear as particles or as waves, depending entirely on how they are measured. This is not metaphor. It is a measurable, repeatable physical fact. When electrons are measured for position and impact, they behave like particles with mass and charge. But when measurement focuses on patterns instead of position, electrons behave like waves. They spread out, diffract, and interfere with themselves. In the double-slit experiment, electrons fired one at a time still create interference patterns, as if each electron passes through both slits simultaneously. But the moment observation determines which slit, the wave behavior disappears. The electron collapses into one definite particle path. This means the electron has no single fixed nature independent of observation. Before measurement, it exists as a range of possibilities, a superposition of states. Observation does not reveal reality. It selects which possibility becomes actual. Reality is built from probability fields, not fixed objects. This becomes even stranger when we consider quantum entanglement. Entangled particles share a single quantum state, no matter how far apart they are. Measure one, and the other is instantly determined, without any signal traveling between them. Einstein called this spooky action at a distance. Yet experiment after experiment has confirmed that entanglement is real. Entangled particles behave as one unified system, not separate things. This principle now powers quantum computing, cryptography, and sensing. But the philosophical implication is far deeper than technology. If reality exists in many states until observed, certainty is not fundamental. Potential is. What becomes real depends on interaction, measurement, and relationship. Reality is not absolute. It is contextual. It is relational. What exists is inseparable from how reality is approached and questioned. At the foundation of the universe, certainty is not given. Engagement is. Quantum law breaks intuition because it overturns our most basic assumptions about how reality should behave. At the quantum level, particles do not exist as definite entities until they are observed. Reality begins as probability, not certainty. Before measurement, a particle exists as a wave function, a range of possible outcomes. This means the universe is not built from solid things, but from possibilities waiting to be resolved. Observation is not passive, it is formative. One clear demonstration comes from the narrow gap experiment. Particles are fired toward two extremely narrow slits, with a screen beyond recording where they land. Classical intuition expects each particle to pass through one slit like a tiny bullet, but that is not what happens. Without observing which slit the particle passes through, an interference pattern appears. This pattern can only be explained if each particle behaves like a wave passing through both slits. Even more unsettling, this happens even when particles are sent one at a time. Each particle interferes with itself as a wave of probability, but the moment observation is introduced, everything changes. The interference pattern disappears. Particles behave like localized objects again. Nothing about the slits changed, only observation. The particle's behavior depends not on what it is, but how it is observed. Before observation, the particle has no definite path. Observation collapses possibility into a single outcome. This violates classical intuition, which assumes objects are definite whether we look or not. Quantum law tells us the opposite. Definiteness emerges through observation. This discomforts the human mind because everyday life feels solid and stable. But beneath that stability, quantum processes are constantly unfolding. Probability comes first. Certainty comes later. What we experience as a stable world is the result of constant, unseen collapses. The observer cannot be separated from what is observed. Reality is not finished. It is continuously shaped by interaction. Quantum law reveals a universe where uncertainty is fundamental and participation is unavoidable. Observation is not neutral. This realization strikes at the heart of one of modern culture's deepest assumptions. We were taught that consciousness is merely a byproduct of matter, an accidental side effect of biology. Quantum physics, quietly but decisively, undermines that belief. At the quantum level, the way an object is observed changes its nature. This is not metaphor. It is a measurable physical fact. Observed one way, a system behaves like a wave. Observed another way, it behaves like a particle. The difference is not in the object, but in the conditions of observation. Attention, measurement, and expectation alter results. Systems respond as if observation is part of their structure, not an external add-on. Classical thinking imagined reality as fully formed, with observation merely recording it. Quantum mechanics shows something different. Reality behaves like a conversation. What appears depends on how the question is asked. The observer cannot be separated from what is observed. This alone challenges the idea that consciousness is insignificant. If observation determines outcomes, then whatever observes must matter. Consciousness cannot be dismissed as a passive shadow. Without observation, outcomes remain undetermined. Something must bridge probability and actuality. That bridge cannot be reduced to machinery alone. This does not mean thoughts magically control the universe. It means consciousness participates in the organization of experience. Living systems respond to attention, physically, emotionally, relationally. These are structural responses, not illusions. If consciousness were irrelevant, reality would unfold the same, whether observed or not. But it doesn't. Observation introduces order, selection, and structure. Consciousness begins to look fundamental, not accidental. Reality is not a stage consciousness watches from the seats. Consciousness is part of the stage itself. In this universe, observation is not neutral. It is one of the conditions through which reality becomes real. There is a deep psychological similarity between quantum behavior and the way human identity forms over time. Just as particles exist in many potential states, identity begins as possibility, not definition. You are not born with a fixed sense of who you are. Identity gradually collapses through attention, interpretation, and expectation. The way you observe yourself acts like a measuring device. Thoughts, emotions, memories, and reactions are constantly being measured. Each time you say, "This is who I am," a version of you becomes reinforced. Repeated observation stabilizes identity, just like repeated measurements stabilize a quantum system. This process happens quietly, often without awareness. Most people live on autopilot, reinforcing the same inner narratives. Attention gravitates toward fear, deprivation, and limitation. The nervous system prioritizes threat, not truth. What receives attention becomes familiar, and familiarity feels like reality. The mind organizes behavior around these patterns. Self-fulfilling psychological loops are created. Repeatedly observing inadequacy creates a life organized around inadequacy. Focusing on scarcity trains the mind to see lack everywhere. Identity becomes a habit, not a truth. Just like particles, identity is shaped by its environment of attention. What you focus on grows because attention collapses possibility into familiarity. This does not mean identity is changed by positive thinking alone, but it does mean identity is not as rigid as it seems. When observation shifts, new psychological possibilities emerge. Attention becomes conscious rather than automatic. Identity reveals itself as a dynamic process, not a fixed object. Like reality itself, identity is shaped by where awareness rests. The subtle power of unobstructed observation lies in this. Observation does not only reveal reality, it quietly shapes what reality becomes. This truth challenges a mind conditioned to believe that force, effort, and control create change. At both the quantum and psychological levels, forcing results creates resistance. When you push for outcomes, perception narrows and systems become defensive. Unobstructed observation works differently. It introduces clarity without pressure. Patterns are seen without being judged, fixed, or manipulated. In this state, awareness stabilizes rather than invades. Systems reorganize naturally when interference stops. Much disorder persists not lack of effort, but from chronic interference. When observation is entangled with fear or control, it distorts what it touches. But open, present, consistent observation creates a clearing. This is why meditation works across cultures and traditions. Meditation is not about forcing silence or manufacturing peace. It is learning to observe without obstruction. Thoughts slow because they are no longer fueled by reaction. Emotions move through the body without resistance. Rigid internal patterns begin to soften. The same principle applies externally. Clear observation opens responses that were previously unavailable. You stop reacting and start responding. Presence changes interaction. Openness expands possibility. Consistency allows new patterns to stabilize. Unobstructed observation is not passivity. It is disciplined engagement. Transformation stops being a battle and becomes a consequence of clarity. Old patterns dissolve because they are no longer reinforced. Self-awareness differs from self-improvement. Seeing clearly is itself transformative. Reality reorganizes itself around clarity. Observation is not weak. It is one of the most subtle and powerful forces consciousness possesses. The transition from victim to responsibility is one of the most profound shifts this quantum law invites. It is often misunderstood as control, but it is not omnipotence. Understanding observation does not give you power over life. It gives you responsibility. You are no longer only a witness to events. You participate in how they unfold. The quality of your perception influences what takes shape. In the victim mindset, life is something that happens to you. Circumstances dictate your inner state, and reaction becomes your default. This worldview depends on believing reality is fixed and consciousness is passive. But once you see that observation is not neutral, helplessness collapses. Responsibility does not mean blame. It means participation. Your inner state matters because it shapes what becomes lived reality. What you repeatedly attend to becomes familiar. What becomes familiar begins to feel inevitable. Over time, perception solidifies into circumstances and behaviors. This is why forcing outcomes often fail. Forcing comes from fear. The fear that without control, things will collapse. Control narrows awareness and reinforces resistance. Open observation creates space instead. Presence softens habitual reactions. Consistency allows new ways of seeing to stabilize. Responsibility becomes practical, not abstract. You take responsibility by observing more honestly, not by trying harder. Clinging loosens. Presence deepens. When attention is steady, experience reorganizes itself. Old patterns lose momentum when they are no longer reinforced. New possibilities emerge when fear-based loops release. This shift is not about judgment, it is about agency. You may not control what arises, but you influence how it is met. Responsibility is ongoing, whether acknowledged or not. Embraced without fear, responsibility becomes deeply liberating.